Hi. Before we get into this conversation, I want to let you know about something I've been working on for a while and which is now available for free on my website. It's a piece called Myth for Modern Men, A Letter to My Son. Again, you can download this for free on my website, explorerpoet.com. I wrote this letter to provide a guide which my son can reference during his own individuation quest, kind of like a map for growing up, maturing, and finding his way in this chaotic world. Today, perhaps more than ever, the world needs men who are balanced, aware, emotionally intelligent, and driven to become whole individuals who can contribute to families, communities, and society in a healthy way. Rather than encourage the process of self-discovery, modern institutions often force men into compliance or predetermined roles. Society seldom encourages young men to explore their values nor think critically, and they don't teach necessary truths about the self, myth, psychology, emotions, fulfillment, education, money, careers, spirituality, relationships, or sex. In Myth for Modern Men, I tackled these topics and many more in a manner that I hope is clear and digestible. Again, you can download Myth for Modern Men for free by visiting my website, explorerpoet.com. Okay, thanks, and please enjoy this conversation. Okay, hi Andrew. Welcome to the Explorer Poet podcast.
Hello. It's my pleasure to be here.
Yeah, I reached out. Honestly, I reached out because I'm a genuine fan of your podcast, The Meaningful Life. But you also do so many other things. So you're an author, many books. You've written many books. One of your most popular being "I Love You, but I'm Not in Love with You." You're also a therapist dealing with relationships, marriage, intimacy, infidelity, and then the podcast, obviously, The Meaningful Life. And just to get started, I'm with all of these different things that you work on. I'm just curious for you, what is the connecting thread? Would you say it's human psychology? Is that what's so interesting to you? What seems important to you?
I think the connecting point is exploring because I'm on a journey of discovery. My supervisor said to me that he learns more from his clients than they learn from him. And I suddenly thought, my gosh, that is so right. And he believes that our clients find their way to us, not just because of what they need to learn from us, but what we need to learn from them. So I'm trying to understand the world. I'm trying to understand myself. And in a way, I started off as a radio presenter, and I was always trying to understand. And I think that's probably one of the common threads, and connection. So I connect with people through my books, through my podcast, and some of them actually in my room in Berlin, where I am a therapist.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. In fact, when I look at the things you've done, so much productivity in this space, it seems that you couldn't have done it without a certain level of curiosity or a desire to constantly be exploring. And I think that, as I was telling you before we started recording, the name of the podcast, The Explorer Poet, a big part of it for me is connection and finding people who are doing something similar. I'm obviously not a therapist, but there's this, listening to your podcast, reading your books, it's this, it's almost like a therapy through transmission. I think Joseph Campbell often talked about some of your greatest mentors and some of your greatest therapists are just the books that you read. And in the modern day, I think that same thing is occurring with podcasts. And so, yeah, I mean, just right off from the beginning, I think that I can see this level of curiosity, this willingness to explore in you. And I think I probably speak for a lot of people when I just say that I'm grateful for that. And then also just you have a great voice for radio, for podcasting. It's and I'm sure you probably hear that before, but when I think about my own voice, I think, oh geez, I don't know if people want to be hearing this, but you've got a great voice for it.
One of the
Yeah.
reasons I started the podcast was actually to meet some of my mentors. Top of my list was James Hollis, the Jungian analyst, who's actually been on twice, and to actually meet the people that when you're down and when you're lost, you open their books to actually be able to speak to them. It's the most wonderful thing. And at the very beginning of my journey as a journalist, which is where I started, when I was something like 21 years old, my tutor said that being a journalist was like being a sex maniac, but only on a wanker's income. I hope you don't mind the bad language.
No, not at
But
all.
what he meant was that being a journalist opens up all these extraordinary opportunities. You know, I've been flown all over the world in the days when people paid good money for newspapers and therefore they had budgets. So I've done the most extraordinary things. I've never earned very much money as a journalist, but it gives me the opportunity to talk to the likes of James Hollis, and I've met several of my idols that way. So I think you're right that it's all about connection.
Yeah, and then just you get to go connect with these people who in some way have been meaningful in your life, but also this thing about conversation where I think about it often, where it's this opportunity to, in a way, if you're really listening, you get to turn off your brain and just kind of tap in. It's like this shared stream of consciousness where somebody else gets to put the thoughts in your head for a little while. And when people have gone and done so much work and so much exploration, so much discovery, it's just this really enriching, almost uplifting experience to just have the opportunity to listen and connect in that way.
And
Yeah,
often I actually choose the guests because my clients are having a particular problem. And so I'll think, I wonder who I could get on to increase my knowledge in this particular field. And sometimes actually the guests that I've got, suddenly my clients start having some of these problems. And so it's rather strange that the world seems to throw the guests and my clients together. So I'm not surprised it sometimes seems like a therapy session.
yeah. I think especially for people who have done a little bit of therapy themselves and got into a place where they understand at least a little bit of how things are operating within them. This is what happens for me is as I go and listen to, for example, your podcast, and you have great guests on who come on with different backgrounds, different focuses. A lot of them have different modalities that they're sharing, and just kind of being able to sit in that and think about it. And then for things that really stand out to you, you actually do get a chance to, maybe not with a therapist directly, but you can implement some things in your life as well. And I think it's really helpful. When you think about your story going from a journalist to a therapist and doing podcasts, when did you decide to commit your career to this subject matter, this topic? And was there like a specific moment where you made that shift from journalism to psychology, or how did that process go?
I had a really strong experience probably about 1 or 2 years into my radio career. I was the producer on a morning phone-in, and my responsibility was to find guests, and I lined up somebody who was what was called a marriage guidance counselor. And we opened up the lines, people phoned in with their marriage problems. And as the therapist was answering the calls, I actually started shaking. The experience of being in this space was so strong, I was sort of shaking with excitement. And I sort of realized, I don't know, on some deep level, this is what I should be doing. And so I started a program on that radio station, which was a late night personal problem phone in. And we're talking back in the 80s when, to say penis on the radio was terribly exciting for people. And so there was sort of more people listening to this program at 10 o'clock on a Sunday night than to any of the other programs, more or less. It was there was a huge need for it, because it's not like now where you can get advice and information from all over. And I would have a panel of experts, including a marriage guidance counselor and vicars and doctors. And my job was to pull out the information from the callers, and I'd pass them over to the experts. And then afterwards, to get them off the air, I would summarize the advice that they'd been given. And lots of people said I was really good. And that what I discovered is that two of the most important skills for therapists is, one, being able to draw people out, and secondly, summarizing what's happened in the session. That is possibly, 80% of being a therapist. And everybody said I was really good. And so I thought I would train as a marriage guidance counselor myself. So that's what I did. And now, 35 years later, here I am still doing it.
Wow, yeah, that seems like at some point maybe the universe just said, "Hey, here you go. This is the path."
Well, I think what happened is that, we don't do things for no reason at all. There was some kind of deep psychological need inside me, which I couldn't explain then. I can explain now if you're interested, that said, this is the path I needed to follow.
Yeah, I am interested in just curious if this, I mean, a lot of the things that drive us as, we enter that phase of our life where we're going to pursue something, it usually comes from something that we've experienced in our youth, in our childhood. And I'm curious if there was a connection there. If you didn't see a lot of perhaps fairy tale ending relationships and marriages when you were young, and this is for some reason stuck out to you when you were older. But yeah, I'd love to hear your explanation of it.
Well, one of the advantages of my podcast is you get to interview really insightful people. And I'm sure you've heard of the therapist Terry Real, who is a really brilliant speaker. And he said to me, therapists need to be in therapy so much, they do it as their job. They do it full time. And I came from a family where we never talked about emotions. In fact, talking about feelings was taboo. So what do? I have spent my whole life writing about feelings, talking about feelings, and sitting in the rooms with people who are having feelings. So it's not surprising I was drawn to it so strongly.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I grew up in a very similar situation. And when I first did therapy myself, this has been a while now, but one of the things that my therapist first identified in me is that exact thing where I was completely unaware of my emotions. I had no vocabulary. And at the time she gave me this word that I had not been familiar with before. And she said it wasn't a diagnosis, but there's this idea of alexithymia as this idea of like being completely unaware of emotions in your body. So I can really relate to that. And here I am, doing a podcast where I reach out to people and try to connect on a deeper level as well.
And I think a lot of us were brought up with this sort of concept that we were a brain being carried around on a lump of meat, and we were not taught to investigate what was happening from the neck down. We were going to approach the world entirely from our heads. And, you're only getting, at the best, half the information if you do that. So, another one of my tasks has been to get down into my body.
Do you have I mean, obviously you've been doing this for a long time, so you've probably gone through a lot of things, but do you have a certain modality or a process that you follow to get into that experience of actually feeling your body, connecting it, learning to trust it? Is there something that works particularly well for you?
Well, I was able to connect with my feelings and my intuition quite quickly, but something I've done just recently, which is really interesting, is gyrotonics. Have you ever heard of gyrotonics?
No, that's new to me.
So gyrotonics is a bit like Pilates, but what they claim is the machines run 360 degrees rather than 180 degrees, or anyway. So you're working with these machines and just moving with a tutor. And the sensation I had was this is how my body wants to move, but didn't actually know this is how it should be moving, because I was a sort of a little bit of a physically awkward child. And this is actually getting all the muscles working and activated and coordinated. And I suddenly felt, this is how my body wants to move, that the back problems that I was having, very minor back problems, all disappeared because my posture improved. I was standing straight. I was sort of carrying my head slightly to one side because I didn't really know how to move. I was a sort of a slightly clumsy child that, was not very good at hand-eye, handball coordination, etc., etc. Not terrible, but I was not one of those children who threw a ball and you could leap up in the air and catch it at some sport. So it's an ongoing process. You get more and more into your body. You learn to trust your intuition more and more. And you develop it further as time goes on.
It's interesting. Given the world that we're in, this need to, like you said, learn that we're not just a brain walking around inside of ourselves, but that this is us, that this body is who we are. And it's fascinating. I want to take this idea and I want to transition into your podcast, because I do want to discuss not just the podcast, but I want to discuss the meaning, and I want to discuss purpose. And I think that for a lot of people, this type of work probably coincides with that, because I see that today there seems to be this need for meaning or purpose, and we almost have to go discover it each for ourselves. And in the past, it seems so strange, because in the past, given the fact that we're biological creatures, if you look at it from an evolutionary perspective, we're evolved social apes. And so having a group is, in a way, central to that meaning of our existence. But then also, if you look at it from a historical or cultural perspective, we've also always gotten meaning from the group through religions and through societies or nations, whatever it may be, our group. And so it seems strange today that the process of meaning making has become such an individualized experience. And I'm curious if you have thoughts about how that's come to be. Like, why is it that in our modern day, meaning is typically done on an individual level instead of that group level? And I think that the connection then for this topic of feelings and emotions and getting used to our bodies is just that it seems like the first step in the modern meaning making process is actually a bit of healing and reconnecting with ourselves through our bodies. But what is it? Why is it that today meaning has become such an individualized experience?
Because we've thrown away all the rules. We've said, the famous quote is, God is dead. And therefore, we're all running around like headless chickens, finding our own answers. We live in a society that questions much more. When I was growing up, what the official channels said on the television was the truth. You didn't question what was on the news in the way that we question it today, and we understand how it's put together and everything. Marriage, was really simple. You just followed the rules that your grandparents and your great-grandparents did, that it was quite simple what you had to do, and the expectations were not particularly high. Whereas we all have to make our own journeys. How you divide up the household is done by, the jobs are done by talent and interest, not gender. And, who goes out to earn the money is also done by talent and interest rather than gender, et cetera, et cetera. And that's absolutely wonderful. because we can do what is right for us. The problem is there's no set of rules to pull down off the counter and say, oh, we're having this problem. It's here in page 42 of the owner's manual. We all have to write our own owner's manual. And that is wonderful, but it's also terrifying as well.
It is terrifying, and I've been married for about 15 years. We're actually celebrating our anniversary next year, and I can say that what you're describing, we actually went through this process of when we were married, we were very religious, and we were married in a system, and that system had these rules. And then as we got older, we decided to leave that system together, and so then we have to go and discover it all for ourselves. Do you have any advice or wisdom for a relationship where people are discovering that they have to do this, that they can no longer follow the rule book, but that they have to do it themselves? What's the best approach then?
The most important approach is to give yourself plenty of time, because we don't like uncertainty. We want to get the rules sorted out in 30 seconds. What kind of sex are we going to have, and when are we going to have it, and with whom are we allowed to have it, etc., etc. I mean, most people will try and sort that one out in 30 seconds. And if you say we've been talking about it a lot, I generally find that conversation is about 10 minutes. I would want to have that conversation across possibly 6 months in therapy. So you've got to give yourself time. And when you're stuck, that means you've just got to go deeper. You need to understand where each of you are coming from. So rather than one person being right and the other person being wrong, you go down deeper and you find a place where both of you can be true. It takes time. And that's wonderful, because there's nothing worse than a couple who are just sitting there in a restaurant with nothing to say, staring out the window. But people are uncomfortable with uncertainty, so they try and get out the door as quickly as possible.
When people put in that time and they are willing, it's like this. It's almost as if there's this healing process taking place when you start having these conversations. And so then all of a sudden people start to have boundaries, and people start to become aware of what they actually want, what their true desires are. And one thing that I've heard recently, both on podcasts that I've listened to, but also in talking with people in my own personal life, is that the more conscious you become, the more difficult it is sometimes to be happy. And I'm curious about your take on that, where for me, I see it a little differently. I almost see like the goal stops being happiness and it starts to be something else. But what are your thoughts on that? If people take the time and they dive deeper, is there happiness? Is there something worth achieving at the end of that path, or along that path?
I find it difficult to understand the idea that you're going to be dumb and happy. I did once have a client who always wanted to be she was a woman. She wanted to be a surfer dude. In her imagination, these guys did nothing but get up in the morning and they went to the beach and they surfed all day long, and they thought of nothing beyond surfing, and they were just perfectly happy. And she was one of the most intelligent, creative, and searching women. And I could not understand why she would want to give all that up. I don't think there's a problem being more conscious. I think that understanding gives you greater insight. I think that if you understand your unconscious, rather than it sort of suddenly grabbing the wheel and steering you straight into the ditch, you can have some kind of negotiation with it, and you can listen to it and have a conversation with it, so to speak. So I think being more conscious is an advantage rather than a disadvantage. But maybe if all you want to do is trying to get through as many items on your to-do list as possible, having a questioning mind might be a problem. But that's not the kind of life I want to live.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that a lot of people, especially coming from, given a religious background like the one I came from, you're actually taught that if you're doing everything correctly, then you'll be happy and you'll be full of joy all the time. You'll be accompanied by the comfort or the warmth of the Holy Spirit. And I think that what you're saying makes a lot of sense, where you become more conscious. And so ideas like that, um, they almost seem like they came from a tricky salesman or something. And the process of becoming more conscious of, or from a Carl Jung perspective, individuating, you are more aware, and you can then become, it's this weird thing where you transition into a state of having a little bit more control or a little bit more awareness, and then you have, I don't know, wholeness. You get to experience things in a different way. um, but I think all of this stuff is probably this challenge of what we started this meaning conversation about, or with, is that there is no rule book, not even with relationships, but in general, there is no rule book for what's right and what's wrong, in the same way that there was in the past. As we all kind of move into this different phase almost of individuating or being individuals. But I'm curious about your thoughts on that word, even individual. Do you see can a human being actually be an individual? Is that the way that we should be looking at it, or is there some other way that this transition should be taking us? Do you believe in the word individual?
My gosh, you ask deep questions. I was thinking that I was coming from the complete opposite end from you. You had an upbringing where religion was center. I had one where it was a sort of a nice, polite thing you did on Sunday mornings, and not every Sunday morning because you didn't want to seem too keen. And so I think for some people, the challenge is to find that spirituality, to find that collectiveness. And it sounds like for you, the journey was more to go from the collective to the individual. And I'm sort of thinking you always need to try and find a middle place between that. One of the things I'm very interested in is the idea of tribe. So you don't just have your family, but you have your tribe. And by tribe, I mean like thinking people. So, we belong to the same tribe, which is podcasters that are interested in spirituality, sort of kind of thing. And we are in the same tribe. We're questing people. I rather was jealous of your title of explorer poet. I thought that's just the most wonderful thing. I want to be an explorer poet too. We're in the same tribe. So we are individuals, but we are part of a collective. And so generally, I think we have to be individuals, yes, but we have to be conscious of the other people around us. We have to be aware of the needs of our partner, which doesn't mean that their needs dictate to us or our needs dictate to them. We have this conversation to find a way that I can be myself, and if we were in a relationship together, you could be yourself.
Yeah, that answer actually really resonates with me, because even from what you were saying, expecting us to have a slightly different approach because of our backgrounds, I think I came from a place that was so collective that I really had to find a way to distance myself and just be, I needed to create my own set of rules. And there was a part of me that wanted to, one of the ways that I saw early social media is, oh, these are just a bunch of people finding their tribes. And there was even a part of me that didn't appreciate that. I felt like why become an individual if if you need this tribe? But what you're saying also makes a lot of sense, where I had to really figure out who I was before I could go figure out who my tribe was. And I think you're right. This idea of connecting with other people who are explorer poets. This conversation with you and our conversation previously, it really makes me think that I need to change the name of the podcast and just add an S there at the end, Explorer Poets, because it really does feel like that's what this whole process is just finding my tribe. And it's something that growing up, I never felt like a part of. I had this bigger tribe that it was the religion and the family and friends associated with it, but I always felt a bit of distance. And I came across in my adulthood, I came across this phrase that really sits well with me, which is friends are the family you choose. And in a way, it really does feel like that's my tribe, right? Go find people who, like you were saying, you get to be individuals and you get to be yourself. And the other people around you, you want them to be individuals and you want them to be themselves. But then by doing that together, you feel like you found these people that you can really appreciate, but then you also feel really appreciated by them. And that's been probably one of the biggest healing experiences for me as an adult, is just being around people where I'm just myself and they just shower me with love for that. And that group it's not always going to be a big group of people, but when I found those people who I can say, okay, these are the family that I choose, it's been absolutely wonderful.
And you can belong to more than one tribe. You can the kind of tribes I'm talking about are not going to hound you if you go and visit another tribe. That they can be interlocking. You can be, some people are in both tribes, and some tribes can have totally different people. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, I think that's what's beautiful about this modern day, about this transition away from the rules, as you said earlier, to then just go find other people who are willing to accept that new way of being. And one of my best friends, like absolutely best friends, I can't have this deep of conversations with him because his mind just doesn't go there. But it makes me feel so good when he's like, he'll send me a quote or something, or he'll send me a clip from something, a podcast he heard, and he'll say things like, "Oh, go talk to your intellectual friends about this." And it just makes me feel so warm inside, because it's like, oh, he gets it. Like he knows that he can't go there with me. It's just not who he is, but he's happy that I get to go there with somebody else. And yeah, I think it's wonderful. You brought up a word that I think gets tossed around a lot, spirituality. And one of the questions I have around meaning making, and in general, getting to the point where you can make meaning of your life. And I think that's like a journey through mental health and becoming more balanced in a way. But can you speak to your thoughts around mental health and the difference between perhaps like a medical, is the mental health crisis a medical emergency, or is this actually an emergency of spirit? Is it a spirituality crisis? And I'm curious how you, being a mental health professional, I can also see that you're on this journey yourself. You said yourself that you are you've found these clients because in working with them it helps you. So how do you conceptualize this, and how do you approach it as either medical or spiritual?
When it comes to my clients, I have a sort of, I bake the cake especially for each client. So some clients will benefit from just a straightforward improve your communication kind of techniques. There are other people who want to go deeper, and I will use psychological material with them. I will, we'll talk about particular mental health ideas. I'm generally not keen on labels. I think that one of the great problems, particularly in America, is to get your therapy paid for by your insurance provider. You need a diagnosis. And what started as a book that was a couple of inches long is now basically the size of a library, because they just keep on adding more and more diagnoses. And I don't know if it's actually particularly helpful for people. So if people want diagnoses, I say go to somebody else who's a specialist in diagnosis. I'm interested in finding out what your problems are, what ghosts. This is where I will use slightly different ideas. What ghosts are around. I don't actually mean physical ghosts, but what are the inherited traumas? Because nearly always what people are doing makes perfect sense when you look at it from a psychological perspective. That no wonder you have anxiety when you look at your background, so to speak, or the fact that you come from generations of people who've had anxiety, particularly here in Germany. There's quite a few generations of trauma from the First and Second World War, and the division of Germany into two countries. People lived in the East in a sort of effectively totalitarian state there. I mean, there's a lot of material. And then occasionally I have clients that want to work on a more sort of spiritual level. And, sometimes I had a client that was dealing with a bereavement, and they said, there's no ritual for our particular kind of bereavement. And I said, well, we'll create one. So, we found out what it is they needed to do. And, we created together a ritual that they could go through and they could perform to heal themselves. So we created a spiritual experience for them to go through. So, I can show up in a variety of different ways, because different people need different things or at different stages in their journey.
Yeah, that's actually a beautiful answer. It's wonderful. That idea of rituals, I've thought about it a lot, because our culture is pretty devoid of certain types of rituals. One of the rituals that we do participate in is relationships, marriage, and romantic relationships. And so I want to talk to you about that. It's a big part of what you do, what you write about. Before we jump into me asking you questions about marriage or relationships, I know that you have a new online course available that you're putting out. So I want to give you however much time you want to just introduce that, and then talk about it, and we can kind of go from there.
Okay, so I've been doing this for almost 35 years now. And over the years, I've tried different things with different people. And some of them I will stay around for a year or so. And others stay forever, because in the real hurly-burly of my room, people find them really useful, and they talk about them all the time, and they are the equivalent of their saw and their hammer and their screwdriver, the sort of things that you really need. And if I sat in my room 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, I wouldn't be able to fulfill the demands that I have. So I thought, why don't I put together all of these basic tools, the ones I use over and over again, and put them into a course that people can do at their own time with their partner or on their own. And so they have these basic things that help them communicate better, help them to listen better, to understand why certain conversations just go round in circles and are destructive, and how to break out of them. And generally, if you can learn these skills, you will transform your relationship. So I've put that in a course, which, as I say, is called My Best Relationship Tools. It's like 4 sessions. Although if I was doing it with you in my room, it would probably take me 10 weeks or something to go through them. But, I'm just going through the material, and you can recap it as many times as you need. So I'm really excited about it, and I hope people would be interested in testing it out.
Yeah, awesome. Do you have is there one like the go-to, the first tool that do you want to just introduce us to really quickly?
Mm. Well, the first one, the one that I nearly always use, and it's sort of either the first or the second section, is listening tools. So the most important one is, well, I'm going to demonstrate it with you. Could you tell me something? Please don't make it too long because I'm going to summarize it.
You want me to tell you
Tell me,
any subject?
no, tell me something important about yourself.
Something important about myself. Um, I think one thing that something that's important to me, and this goes along with what we were talking about earlier with tribes, is that um, I really feel like in order for me to share myself with people, I really have to feel like I can trust them. And so it's kind of easy when I do conversations like this to just be very open and share. But in the real world, in the wild, when I interact with other people, it can actually be very difficult for me to get to a place where I feel like, okay, we're becoming friends, because most people in the wild don't open up in these types of ways. They don't have these types of conversations. And so until I can really understand who somebody is, it makes it more difficult for me to open up, because there's like a level of trust that I need to develop with people. And a big part of that for me is sharing.
So I'm now going to summarize back what you've said. I mean, if you were in my room, I would have stopped you because there was a lot of information there for me to summarize. But anyway, I'm going to do my best. That for you to share, you need to be able to trust. And that's easy in this particular world. But out in the real world, you don't normally get to go this deep with people. And therefore, it makes it much harder for you to trust them and to be able to open up. Is that right?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right.
And if I miss something out, please do tell me.
No, I think that's enough of it. I think that's the gist of it. Yeah.
Is there more? Now, this is the most important question you can actually ask your partner. In fact, it's the most loving 3 words. Is there more? Even more loving than I love you, because actually, is there more? I'm asking you to tell me more material. And normally it's about the things I've done wrong or that you're upset about me with. So to actually be able to say, rather than shut you down, I don't want to hear that, to say, is there more, is incredibly loving. So is there more?
Um, no, but just having you say that, is there more? If I could get certain people in my life just to ask such a simple question, then our relationship probably would improve drastically.
And the problem is we don't listen, because when you start saying, to share, you need to trust. I'm now, if we were in a relationship, I'm going to be beginning to think, oh, why doesn't he trust me? And, after all I've done for him, and I'm going to start preparing my defense rather than listening. And it could be that I'm preparing a defense on something that I only half heard. So to actually really stay with your partner and to summarize it, and it really makes the other person feel heard. It slows down the conversation incredibly, and it becomes more meaningful in that way. So that would be one example, and I go through it in great detail in the on the video, and I have somebody who we do the whole exercise together, so you can really see how it works.
Yeah, I could really see how that works. And I think coming from a world where emotions and feelings, like you said, weren't not only were they weren't spoken about, but they were also in a way taboo, where if you spoke about them, you were usually punished in some way, so like socially or even directly, like shut down. To have somebody listen and then respond is it is the way that you feel love, because for people who want to be seen, people who want to be heard, That's that's how you experience that. It's like the first time you actually get to experience that and know that somebody actually they're interested in what's going on in your head, what's going on inside of you. And yeah, I mean, that's fantastic.
And I think if you get to the place of I love you, but I'm not in love with you, you are feeling that you're not being truly seen or truly heard. Yeah, you get heard when you say, we're out of cheese. Can you pick some up for me? But when you open your heart, the other person is looking at their phone. So you don't feel seen or heard in the way that actually just summarizing what they've said is incredibly powerful.
Yeah, it's interesting, given that we live in this world where there's not necessarily a rule book anymore. It used to be that everybody had a role in a relationship and there were rules that you followed. I often think about relationships and a lot of things in life. I think about them as games. And if you're going to play a game, particularly in a marriage relationship, then you've got to be willing to follow the rules, or what's the point of playing the game? And given this world where there is no more rule book, it can be, I would see things like this tool that you just shared very simply as a powerful rule, or maybe rule is not even the right word, but a powerful tool, a powerful process or focus in a marriage where there is no more rule book. And so you really do need to be able to pull that out of each other and show each other that you're trusting or loving the other person.
And you need to make certain you're both playing by the rules, because if you're playing by one set of rules and you're expecting your partner to also play by them, and they don't even actually know what the rules are because they haven't actually been stipulated, they don't know what the contract is. They might know the headlines of it, but they don't know the paragraph 3C. And you need to make these explicit. This morning I spent a whole time on a couple that were about to make a new contract with each other, and they just gave the headline. I was going, wait. I think there might be some sub-clauses here. And, in fact, actually, they were both about to sign up to a contract that neither of them actually fully understood. And they're going away and they're going to think more about some of the smaller items, which turned out to be really contentious. But they hadn't actually, because it was an uncomfortable kind of conversation. They were trying to get out the door without actually not just reading the small print, but actually creating the small prints that would be the stuff that would actually trip them up if they weren't aware of it.
Yeah. And it's not like many of us had a very good example as we grew up. In here in the West, is particularly in the United States, romance or marriage relationships, it's all pitched to us as these happily ever after fairy tales, Disney movies, and comedy romances. But when you look into the real world, into your own experience, you don't often see relationships that mirror what you hope for in the future. Um, but a big part of our current meaning making seems to be finding a partner, finding somebody to live with and go through life with. And I'm curious from your perspective, starting at the basics, is love, like a romantic committed relationship, is that necessary for us to find meaning in our life?
Well, we're saying everybody's on their own individual journey, and different people will find meaning in different ways. And that's perfectly okay.
Yeah. And this maybe just speaking from a little bit of personal experience, when you get it, maybe you get into a rowboat in the beginning and you're both rowing in the same direction. And then what can end up happening is you have some new ideas in your life, you go through some changes, maybe a bit of healing, and what was maybe originally like a pattern in a relationship, one of the in the way that you interact with each other, in the way that you communicate, in the way that perhaps you manage emotions between the two of you, what was originally maybe a pattern, can one of the partners can then say, I'm not comfortable participating in this pattern anymore. what advice do you have for somebody who's going through a healing transition or a healing process, and so decides that they do want to paddle in a different direction? What advice do you have for that person? And then what advice do you have for the partner who's not going through the same healing process, or maybe didn't experience the same trauma in childhood? For each one of them, do you have a piece of advice?
Well, if you're the one who's receiving the information that your partner wants to paddle in a different direction, I would say my best piece of advice would be tell me more. So you really understand where it is they want to paddle towards, not where you fear they want to paddle towards. These might be two totally different things. And because our natural fear is that they're going to throw us off at the next island, so to speak. And that might not be the case. So, ask lots of curious questions as well, so that you truly understand, and be aware that it's very unlikely that your partner knows exactly where they're going either. They're just sort of thinking, I want to head off in this general direction of north, but they have no idea exactly where they're going to go, because, you will follow like a breadcrumb trail. You'll be reading Jungian analysis one day, and then you'll be looking at Buddhist meditation the next day. So you're not necessarily that sure yourself. My expectations, though, is this idea that, we've got one partner that's traumatized and one that's normal. I think birds of a feather flock together. And so, I think it's no surprise that both you and your wife found each other and then found your way out of the religion that you were brought up in. Generally, our particular traumas often sort of fit together. There might be one partner who, to deal with their trauma, tries to control everything, and there might be their partner their way of dealing with trauma might be to give up all power to somebody else. And so you can begin to see how on one level that could work really well, but on another level, we're being trauma bonded, which probably isn't the best kind of basis. And one person changing is going to be terrifying. And it's very easy to say, the problem is that you want to change. And this is a big ask, but to look at it as an opportunity. What can I learn at this point? How do I need to change? Because it could be that some of my material, some of my ghosts need to be attended to too, rather than pointing the finger. The question that I ask my clients over and over again to ask themselves is, what can I do differently? And the answer is, what most people want is they want their partner to act differently. They've got 100 ways that their partner could act differently. And beyond walking away or not caring, these seem to be the only two options they've got for what they could do differently. And I promise you, there are hundreds of different things you could do differently rather than just giving up.
Yeah, it reminds me of what you were saying earlier about how one of the biggest things in reaching that eventual relationship that would be satisfying for you is just time, just being willing to not have one conversation and call it off, but to be able to, put in the time, because for somebody to change, it takes time. Maybe the initial collapse of the old architecture, the old pattern, the old way of life, maybe that could happen quickly. But then, to, like you were saying, even the person going through that process, they have no idea where they might not know where they want to go. They might not know where it's going to take them. And so even just figuring that out takes time. And all the while, your partner they have to be patient, I guess. They have to be willing to wait that out with you.
I think that you're being a bit optimistic that we change quickly. We think we're going to change quickly. We've learned something, but the habits are installed deep inside our programming. So I think we change much slower than we actually think. It's taken me a lot of years to start talking about my feelings and to feel comfortable about talking about my feelings. And I'm still, if I talk to my partner about my feelings, I have this fear that I'm not going to be taken seriously, that they're not valid. And, you know, I've been in therapy a long time. I've been a therapist for a long time. I've been on this journey for a long time, and I still find it difficult. So I think you might be just being a little bit too optimistic about how quickly we change, to be honest.
Well, maybe not the change, but that's why I was saying it takes time, is maybe not the change, but suddenly having a desire to change can happen quickly. But then the
Yeah.
actual change can take months, even years. And along that path, you're maybe not even aware of which change, like where that change is taking you.
So I mean, it's the one that you're very interested in, myths and stories and fairy tales. The one, there's two basic things in every fairy tale, which is one, be brave, and number two, keep going. That's the universal message from every single story. And we just have to remember it. You know, we have to be brave and we have to keep going.
Oh, that's beautiful advice. In fact, that every now and then I have these little synchronicities because I'm working on what I really want to be is a writer, and so I'm working on a my first book, and every now and then as I go through life, somebody says something or I read something, and then I go, oh, I guess I like that wasn't my idea. It's just that I tapped into it, and so um, yeah, that's I think that that's good advice not only for relationships but for life in general, especially as we go through these transitions from the collective into an individual, and then trying to find some kind of balance between them. Um, Bravery is probably a big part of it, and then just keep going. Yeah, just keep going. I think that if we just keep working at if we just keep working at it, then good is going to come from it. You're going to feel you could feel more whole, you could feel more complete, more balanced as an individual, and you could probably feel that way as well in a marriage relationship, in any kind of relationship.
And you're going to be growing. And one of my early podcasts, somebody said the meaning of life was growth, that actually the difference between inanimate objects and live objects is they're growing and changing. And so he said the meaning of life was growth. And there's a sort of very simple truth in that. Yes, it is about growth.
Yeah, as long as you are continuing to learn and expand and grow, then there is like this richness in life. This it's like being a kid again, because you just become fascinated by things and they suck you in. And for a while, I actually there was this part of me, again, given the world that I grew up in, there was this part of me that wanted to push back on the idea that the whole purpose is just to keep growing, because I couldn't help but think like, but there's going to be a point where it just ends. And so what's the point of just growing and growing and growing until it ends? But it took a while for me. But I got to this point where I realized that, yeah, that really is the purpose, because once you feel it, once you actually experience it, you know, some real growth, not the type of growth that maybe your parents explained or believed in, or the type of growth that some religious group or an educational group believed in, but the type of growth where you feel it inside yourself. And what it feels like to me is it starts with some level of healing. And I don't know if you can ever fully heal from your own background, from the history of the world, but I started to see healing, growth, maturation, integration, individuation. They're all part of this same, they're almost synonymous, and they're this part of this process. And when you start to feel that, oh man, it just feels it's just a different way of living, where you start to realize that the things that have always felt like hangups, the things that have always been your stumbling blocks or held you back, um, they don't have to be that thing forever. And there's just something so empowering about actually experiencing that rather than just hearing other people talk about it.
And you're going to learn from your stumbling blocks. When you fall over, that's the time you learn. Sadly, we don't learn anything from a good time.
Yeah, very true. Very true. Um, there's we're up at the hour, and so I want to be respectful of your time. Um, but this conversation for me, I feel like you're the kind of person I could just talk to forever. And so uh, first, just want to say thank you for taking this time to speak with me about all this stuff. But then also, thank you for being an explorer poet yourself and being willing to. This whole path for you, it must have been very vulnerable. It must have been at different times. You had to probably go through some discomfort, even some fears. But there's something about being an explorer, just like you said, they have to be brave and they have to keep going. And beyond being that, I'm just grateful that you were willing to come back and share it and put it into words and put it into tools so that other people can also benefit from it. So in a way, it makes you not only the explorer, but also you return as the poet who has the words. And it's you're that hero coming back with the boon. So I really appreciate everything that you've done.
And thank you for that and putting it in such a poetic way.
Yeah, absolutely. Before we get off, do you just want to, and I'll add all this stuff to the show notes, but do you just want to point listeners really quickly to where they can find your work, books, podcasts, if anybody's in your area and they're interested in therapy as well?
So the place that you can get in contact with me the best is through my website, www.andrewgmarshall.com. My podcast is called The Meaningful Life with Andrew G. Marshall, and I have a different, let's call them an explorer, I call them a witness, about what makes their life meaningful. They generally tend to be therapists, but there can be people who are researching a particular area, academics, philosophers, and from time to time, people who've got an extraordinary journey to share. I hope that you'll have a listen to it and enjoy it. I have a team of therapists who work with me. They can be accessed through my website. And then I have for people who actually live in Germany, in Berlin, which is possibly quite a small number of your listeners, then I see people face to face, and though I do have a waiting list at the moment, and the website for that is Couple Counseling Berlin. But you'll be able to get in contact with me through my main website as well.
Okay, well, awesome. Again, I really appreciate this, Andrew. I had a great time, and all the best with you. And thank you. And bye.